MacVoices is supported by LinkedIn Jobs. Find the right person for your business today with LinkedIn Jobs. Pay what you want and get $50 off your first job post at linkedin.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, like you, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and probably like you, once in a while I hear something said that causes me to yell at my iPhone or my car radio or whatever. Unlike you, though, I have a podcast where I can invite those people who make those statements on to defend and argue with them, and I can even maybe yell at them in person, and that's what we're doing here tonight. So before we get to why I'm going to yell at these people, first up, Mr. John Martellaro, who happens to take my side in this situation. John, it's great to have you back. Good to see you.
Nice to be here. Hi, Chuck.
Taking the other side, leading, I guess, the other side is Mr. Bryan Chaffin. Bryan
and Chuck.
Bryan and his hat. Yeah, it's great to have you.
And,
great to have you.
And Puppy, he's under my feet. You can't see him. Under my feet. Puppy, he will be appearing. Sir, not appearing in the show until later.
Oh, okay.
Puppy to be named later.
Yeah, and if he makes a noise, I apologize ahead of time, Chuck.
That's okay. Does the puppy have a name yet, Bryan?
Yes, his name is Ichabod Ezekiel Cromwell, but he recently got a promotion to commander. So he's Commander Ichabod Ezekiel Cromwell.
Do those names have like some family significance to you, or?
Nope, they're throwbacks, man. You know me. Okay. I love my anachronisms.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. Okay. All right. Well, good. Well,
Ichabod seems like a goofy name. It's a very goofy name for a dog. And it's also a nice throwback to like the 19th century.
Okay.
Good name for a bird, too.
Yeah. Bryan and his time machine will be appearing later. And last but absolutely not least, the host of Daily Observations, Ms. Kelly Guimont. Kelly, it's good to see you.
Does that mean you're going to call me an instigator in all this? Because I really didn't instigate anything. I just let them on the show and brought my knitting. And it was up to the two of them to start this whole conversation. So,
well, but as I recall, you agreed with Bryan, so that's why I'm putting you over on his side of the fence. And
okay.
I didn't think it was fair to have John and I team up against Bryan, so hence the trying to balance things out.
I would say something correct. That is not fair because you would both be grossly outmatched.
Bryan Chaffin has a posse. E-I-E-I-O. I mean.
Okay. Well, so let's explain this. First of all, when I commented in email to these three, Bryan's comment back was I was wrong and that I was myopic.
Yes.
Which and that's sort of what prompted me to get him on the show so I can challenge that.
I in no way was pushing buttons.
Who better to join forces with you than moi?
Exactly. That's the way I felt about it, John. So I want to make sure I characterize this correctly because it was in the midst of another discussion. But Bryan, I think and seriously, correct me if I misrepresent this, but your comment was that if Apple enters a market that there are already competitors in, and we're talking about the App Store, by the way, folks. If Apple enters a market that a competitor is already in, that you think that Apple should give that competitor a break from the 30%. Is that a correct statement?
That is part of a correct statement, yes.
Okay, then fill out the correct statement, and then I'll tell you why you're wrong.
So the specific thing here is with Spotify, and where Apple is competing against Spotify in the App Store, and Apple doesn't have to pay 30% to Apple, or it does, but it turns out that's okay because Apple still gets the 30%, and that this is unfair, and in a because of Apple's size and because of Apple's enormous economic power, that the correct and fair thing to do would be for Apple to give companies that it's competing with a break on the percentage that it takes.
So that would be Spotify, Google, Amazon.
Google doesn't have a music app in the iOS App Store, do they?
I don't know.
I don't think so. We were specifically talking, I think, about music in this exact instance, if I'm not mistaken.
There would be the interesting thing to me is that there are aspects of competition that I don't think is a problem for Apple or any other large corporation. The reality is, like for streaming services in particular, that size matters. Like for instance, Spotify largely loses money and is trying on every customer, and they're trying to make it up in volume, which is just great. And for companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, maybe Facebook at some point, to operate a music sharing service or music streaming service at a loss because they can afford it, I don't have a problem with.
Do we know that?
What? That it's a loss?
Losing money?
No. But I'm saying even if it's at a loss. In other words, they're running it at a loss in order to have a competitive advantage. I don't have any kind of problem with that. What I do have a problem is Apple going toe-to-toe with smaller competitors and not and having this benefit of not having to pay their own tax. I don't have a problem with the tax. I believe that Apple should charge. I just think that it makes the most sense for them to carve out exceptions when they're competing, especially against small companies. And I would further add that if you think that a world is right where a company that's worth $2 trillion that controls more assets than a crap ton of countries in the world can turn around and poop all over its competitors, that's not a world I want to live in. Apple does have obligations for its size, profits, resource control, the economies of scale. It has some obligation to the rest of the world. It has some obligation to competitors, and it has some obligation to be a good corporate citizen. And just becoming ever bigger and driving out all of the competition doesn't do anyone any good. And I don't want to live in that world.
I just want to give some context because I want to go back for a second just to point out the thing that happened that made Chuck shouty. And it's that we were talking about Spotify because after Apple's most recent event, the Time Flies event, as part of that event, Apple released the Apple One bundle. And sorry, John can't see when I pronounce air quotes, the Apple One bundle. And the Apple One bundle included music, and it includes a couple of other things, and you can get like tiers of it if you're on a family plan. And Spotify came out and called it unfair. And so that was what got John wound up about this. And John being wound up about it, he immediately took his wound upness and pointed it at Bryan, and that's how this whole conversation started. And I see both sides of it, but I think I agree with Bryan's point of view, which is, yes, there's a cost to doing business, and yes, other companies should be paying that. But for Apple to sort of come in later and go, it does give them a fundamentally unfair advantage. Now, whether or not it's Apple's prerogative to press that advantage is probably the thing we're actually debating. But I could see where Bryan was coming from with this, and I said so on the show, and that's how this all started, because then Chuck emailed me and said, I'm shouting at my phone again, and you are why. So
well, what's interesting is that Spotify used the word unfair, which is code word for teenager whining. My wife,
I actually agree with you on the Apple One complaint from Spotify. I agree with you. There's a lot that Spotify complains about that I have no empathy for whatsoever.
I mean, if they had come out with a strong, mature technical response, like it's anti-competitive according to citing some precedent.
Yes.
But then that would have had more weight. But to simply whine and say, that's not fair, doesn't make you have a lot of sympathy for them.
They took a page out of the Epic playbook, and that wasn't the playbook they should have been reading. So.
Okay, so my response to during our brief email back and forth on this is,
which was beautiful, by the way.
Well, I think the one key thing that John jumped in and agreed with me is that if I'm Apple, why am I going to hand my competitor the baseball bat to beat me with?
Yes.
And
because you own the baseball field, the baseball, the gloves, the uniforms, and the umpires.
How did they get there, Brian? They were ready to go bankrupt in 1996.
And things changed, and when things changed, the rules changed too.
No, Brian, I can't go with you because, and as folks know, I go a bit apoplectic when anybody says because they have all this money, this is what they should do. No, that should have nothing to do with it.
I don't want to live in that world, Chuck. I don't want to live in the world where the rich can do whatever they want. I don't want to live in the world where a corporation can squash and crush through unfair means any would-be competitor just because they want to. That's a crappy world to live in. It's
unfair to treat everybody equally.
No, why are you jumping to that? I mean,
well, you say that Spotify especially deserves a price break, whereas everybody else doesn't.
Yeah, probably Pandora, probably all of the small streaming services.
Because Spotify was a well-established, already like a done deal, like streaming service. They weren't new. They were a very known quantity when Apple bought Beats, even back that far. When Apple bought Beats Music and rolled out Beats Radio or whatever they called it, and when they started doing all the Apple Music stuff, that was where, I think that's the thing that Brian is sort of talking about. Like, Spotify was a known quantity. Pandora was a known quantity. I know there's at least one more that I can't think of right now. And that's even before you get to stuff that isn't necessarily on iOS. Like, if you subscribe to YouTube, I think there's a YouTube Music situation you can get in on. I'm not 100% on that. Amazon Music was also already a done deal. I think when Apple rolled out like Radio One and Zane Lowe and all of that stuff, I think there were already a number of players in the marketplace. There were a number of people who were already doing this, who had sort of worked out the mechanics of doing it, and that's the part I think where the hang-up is coming from. And Chuck, I disagree with saying that a company with a lot of money can do whatever it wants. The thing that I see in this is the part that Brian's talking about, which is not they bought the stadium, the bases, the gloves, the uniforms, the refs, but that they own it. Like, if Spotify is going to come and play a game in Apple's stadium, they can't show up and say, I want to play rugby when Apple has set everything up for tennis. Like, that's just not how it works. If you don't come to play the game that Apple is equipped to play, you don't get to play. It doesn't have anything to do with Apple having enough money to do that. To me, it just has to do with, this is Apple's ecosystem. It's Apple's app store. It's Apple's servers. It's Apple's devices. And so, like, if you don't want to play that game, that's fine. That's up to you. It's your decision to make.
The way I think of that, Kelly, is an analogy. Like car companies, Peugeot or Suzuki left the U.S. market, but decides to come in and sell cars. Uh-huh. And they have a tough time going up against Ford and General Motors.
Yes.
And they're not selling as many cars as they like because people are kind of, hooked on buying Fords and Chevrolets.
Okay.
And Suzuki says, that's unfair. You're big and powerful and you own all these car dealerships. You should lower the prices on your cars so there's not so big a gap and help us compete better. That's never happened in the history of civilization.
That's not the same at all because Chevy doesn't own the road.
And Chevy doesn't own all the dealerships, and
Apple doesn't own
the gas station.
The road is the internet.
No, they don't own Apple doesn't own the road. I'm not saying that they do.
Apple owns the house in this particular case. Apple owns the dealership, actually, in this particular case.
Yeah.
Let me try a different analogy. Okay. I recently needed some new sheets for my bed. Okay. I go to Target. I look at the sheets. There are the Target branded sheets. And then there is, the Joe Smith sheets, whatever, sure. a name brand. Okay. So clearly Target in their store is competing with the Joe Smith sheets by marketing their own brand. So should they give the Joe Smith sheets a break to be in the store? I mean, I don't think so. Because Apple has to maintain the store, the streaming, the store, the servers, all that stuff that they have to maintain, and then they just walk in and say, "Hey, Spotify, yeah, we'll cut you a break." No, I'm sorry that they're just because they happen to be in the same market, that they should get no more break than Adobe or Microsoft or anybody else. And I know that those are not streaming apps. But the point is that those are apps that want to be in the store. They pay the freight because that's and Apple has said, look, you want to be in, you pay the freight. You don't want to be in, that's fine. A la Epic.
And
I don't think that the Target analogy is very. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kelly. I mean, walk over you.
No, go ahead, because I want to hear more what you have to say.
I don't think the Target analogy is good because Target is one of many retailers. Joe Smith can be in Target. Joe Smith can be in Walmart. Joe Smith can be in Kohl's. Joe Smith can be in the Kmart. There are still some Gibsons left, I hear. Joe Smith can be in Amazon too. And but the reality is, if you want to be on the iPhone, you do have to be in the App Store. I reject when people like Spotify or the European regulators try to call Apple a monopoly. I reject that logic. That logic makes no sense to me. But the reality is that Apple has a very unique situation, and Apple has a crap ton of resources, and Apple has a very unfair advantage, most of which is okay. Like, I don't mind that Apple has the big ecosystem and then is adding all these services to go with that ecosystem. That's an advantage, and that's an advantage that Apple is building. And that's fine, in part because it actually works to consumers' benefit. But when it comes to this one little thing where their competitors are trying to compete with them on price, but have this 30% tax that goes to Apple, it doesn't make sense for that to happen. It doesn't. It is not a logical world where those are the rules.
This edition of MacVoices is supported by LinkedIn Jobs. Make your next great hire with LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs can match your job description to qualified candidates quickly and easily, so your next hiring experience is a positive one. They do that by first making it easy to manage your job posts and candidate contacts in a single view on the already familiar LinkedIn.com that you know. Then, they throw in an efficient rating system to help you get your job in front of the right people. Next, they let you do all that from your mobile device, so you can tackle hiring whenever and wherever you are. Finally, they have over 690 million members, so the odds of you finding the right person are definitely in your favor. When your business is ready to make that next hire, find the right person with LinkedIn Jobs. You can pay what you want and get the first $50 off. Just visit linkedin.com/MacVoices. Again, that's linkedin.com/MacVoices to get $50 off your first job post. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks to LinkedIn Jobs for their support of MacVoices.
Bryan, let's talk about money for a second. Apple came up with 30%. And we assume that Apple calculated the cost of overhead, the cost of maintaining the store, the cost of paying people to inspect the apps and publish them.
Yep.
All that overhead, plus a little bit of profit for themselves. For,
a lot of profit, but go ahead.
Doing good work for their shareholders. So let's say that 30% is the lowest they can go. And let's say that 25% or 20% would lose money.
Okay.
Probably there's probably some point, I don't know where it is, but let's just reasonably assume that there's some point where they would lose money.
Mm-hmm.
And let's call it 25%. So they give Spotify a break according to Bryan's law, and Apple loses money on that particular customer instead of making money like they do with all their other customers. Is that right?
Well, first of all, you're arbitrarily picking 25%. I don't know what the percentage is.
Like I said, it's just an arbitrary number, but there's some point where you would imagine.
There is some point where Apple is actually losing money, and it's because they're competing against these small competitors. Boo-hoo. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with Apple taking little lump to the chin in this particular regards, because it makes for a better marketplace and it makes for a better environment for everybody concerned.
What SEC rule, what federal regulation, what law of capitalism requires Apple to do that? I mean, if Apple were to do something wrong,
do the right thing, man. That's the only law that's involved here. Just doing the right thing.
But Bryan,
if you want a law, it's Wheaton's law, John. It's Wheaton's law, which I'm not going to repeat, so Chuck doesn't have to edit the show. But it's Wheaton's law. Go look it up.
Okay, so but Bryan, I disagree because if they do that, and I know you'll do a disclaimer, I'll do the disclaimer now. I own a small holding of Apple shares.
Oh, yeah, I do too. Yeah.
Okay, so they are not fulfilling their fiduciary responsibility with my investment in their company if they are operating anything at a loss.
Mm-hmm. Nonsense. Are you kidding me, man? Are you kidding me? What about the health of the overall ecosystem? Do you think that Apple makes more money having both Apple Music and Spotify in the App Store, or do you think that Apple would make more money by having only Apple Music in the store? So how are you going to quantify that? That is this notion that fiduciary responsibility requires everything to eke out the last possible cent of profit. It means that Apple can't be doing any of its environmental stuff, that Apple can't be doing things like using recycled rare earths. There's a whole slew of things that Apple does. And Tim Cook told us, if you want a company that's going to be focused on that, go invest somewhere else.
I will grant you that. I remember that comment from Tim Cook.
It was about a different aspect, but it's the same fiduciary responsibility argument.
I disagree because in those other circumstances, they are not supporting or propping up a competitor.
Okay, so again, quantify for me where Apple's ecosystem is better, with no competitors or with multiple competitors, and Apple's platform being the best place to use those competitors.
Well, that's a false premise because there's no proof that Spotify is going to go out of business simply because they're paying Apple 30%. You're talking about 30% driving them out of business and driving them out of the market.
Or driving them off the App Store. As it is right now, Apple has Spotify has chosen to remove its ability to pay through Apple from the App Store. Is Apple's platform better with that or without that, where people could actually pay for things through the App Store? And you can't really quantify that stuff, but that's what I would argue as an attorney, which I am not. That's what I would argue if there was a shareholder a fiduciary responsibility lawsuit brought against me. I mean,
you've hit on something very important.
I hate that argument. I hate that short-term outlook.
When I buy a book from Amazon, I don't go through Apple on my Kindle app. I go straight to the website. I buy the book from Amazon directly. Amazon gets all the money, and then they update my app. And then when I go back to the Kindle app, magically there's my book.
Yeah, I think Apple, if you can buy a Kindle book through an app, an Amazon app that's on the App Store, that means that Apple gave Amazon a break.
Yes, because if
there is no 30% from the publishing industry, there's no extra magical 30% to cut out.
I'm fuzzy, and I will point out, I will freely admit, I've been drinking, but I do recall that there was a moment when you couldn't buy anything through the Amazon app on the App Store.
Yeah, including
anything. You couldn't buy you couldn't buy Diddly or Squat on the app through the Amazon app that was on iOS on the App Store. You couldn't do it. And I don't remember how long that went on, but it was not very long. And then all of a sudden, you can use the Amazon app to buy stuff now, whether it's a Kindle book, whether it's a book, whether it's a car. I guess they do now. But
Apple has cut a break.
There are places where deals have been made, and I think that's part of. I think that's the other part of it is I think that Bryan, I'm with you on the fiduciary responsibility thing. I think that there's a certain amount of stuff that Apple has to do because it's a good idea. I'm sure it costs more to use recycled rare earth minerals and stuff than it is to just go scrape them out of the ground, all brand new every time. But it's the right thing to do, and so they're doing it. And I do think there's something to be said for that. Now, do I think Spotify is going to go out of business? No, but there are other places you can get There are other places you can get Spotify. I can have Spotify on my computer. I do have Spotify on my computer. I can have Spotify on my computer and listen to it there all day long. And if I choose to make a purchase, it's going to kick me out to the web, and I'm going to go to the web page and I'm going to pay for it and move on with my life. And that was never that's not a thing that anybody has ever been upset about that I can remember in the history of sitting in front of a computer. And I've been sitting in front of a computer for longer than I'm going to admit on this program. But
well, no,
nobody has an issue with that. And this is the same idea. Apple made my computer. Apple made my phone. Apple has decided on my phone, this is the set of rules that I must abide by. And on my computer, that set of rules does not exist. And that's fine.
Okay, so hold it. So a couple things here. I mean, first of all, Apple is not the only game in town. All right. There's Android. So people have a choice. If they really want Spotify on their phone, they can move over to Android. All right. That's the first thing. And the second thing,
if they want to pay for it on their phone, you can have Spotify on your phone now, I think.
Okay.
Right.
On your iPhone, you can have it. You just can't pay for your subscription that way.
Okay.
You can't pay for it through an app from the App Store. You could actually pay for it and listen to it through the web.
Wow. Yes. So there's a huge inconvenience for Spotify users that they actually have to go to a website. Okay, second thing is, and this one I have to ask because I really don't know. Does Spotify have a web player or not?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Okay, so I could go to Spotify. I mean, I would need a Spotify app. I could go to Spotify through my web browser and use it.
Yes.
Okay. Third.
Yeah, you can do that.
Man, you're going through some major contortions to.
Well, that's what Tim talks about. When Tim gets confronted with these issues, he talks about how the competition is severe and plentiful.
And it
is. Just because a company doesn't like the nature of the way they have to compete, or because they've chosen the wrong horse, the wrong technical horse to fight with. Okay.
Well,
it's not Apple's problem.
No, wait, hang on, Kelly. The one last thing, okay, and then I'll let you go. But how about the fact that Apple now, scratch that. Spotify is doing Spotify only podcasts.
Uh-huh.
All right. So I think I've got this right. I think Joe Rogan went over there.
Yep.
So if I want to hear Joe Rogan, I've got to go to Spotify.
You have to pay for Spotify. I don't think you can get Joe Rogan for free on Spotify. I think you have to buy it.
Okay, so
in order to get to listen to him.
So isn't that unfair? I mean, if I use an iPhone and
now I have to. No. Exclusive content isn't the issue.
I don't know if I bought Spotify, I'd have to listen to Joe Rogan, and that sounds terrible to me.
Here's the biggest irony of all this conversation. I actually think that Spotify is a terrible competitor and should go out of business. I'm not defending Spotify. I don't care about Spotify one way or the other. I was merely talking about the principles of fairness and the fact that Apple has a responsibility to its fellow citizens and to the rest of us because of its outsized influence and resource control.
Apple has a responsibility to maintain a healthy environment for its workers. Apple has a responsibility to be green and recognize the fragility of the planet and to, go carbon free and to use solar power. There they have social responsibilities. But when it comes to competition, there's no such thing as responsibilities against your competitor. It's only responsibility to yourself and to your shareholders.
Fantastic. I look forward to, it being like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, and all restaurants are Taco Bell.
Brian, have you
that's
looked
terrifying.
Up, Brian,
that's a movie. Come on, Kelly, that's a movie reference for you. You should have.
Yes, I did. Okay, that doesn't make it any less terrifying. It's okay. I'm picking up what you're putting down. I'm just inserting my own commentary. That would be a bad idea. Anyway.
Brian, I mean, what John said, have you looked up the definition of competitor recently? I don't. Yes. I mean, so why am I responsible for the health of the guy who's trying to put me out of business?
Because you had $2 trillion, that your company's worth $2 trillion.
That's wrong. That has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, it has everything to do with everything, man. The world where companies who have all of the things can do anything that they want and put out.
But they can't do anything that they want. There's SEC rules, there's federal regulations, there's antitrust law. There's a wealth of federal law and rules competitors. And if Apple does something wrong,
Sure.
You can bet they're going to be on their case, especially the
sure.
European Union.
Sure. Fantastic. That's great. So again, if that's the world you want to live in, enjoy it, because we're probably heading there in the first place. It's not the world I want to live in.
When Mike Tyson was heavyweight champion, did he have an obligation to say, "Oh yeah,
No,
I'm
man,
going to let
that's
my
ridiculous.
competitor"? Well,
No.
that's what you're saying.
No.
You're saying
No, it's not, because Mike doesn't own all of the training facilities. Mike doesn't own all of the opportunities to fight. Mike doesn't own the rule book for fighting. Mike doesn't own all the arenas, and Mike doesn't control all of the sponsors who could actually pay other fighters to fight. It's not. That's not even a vague.
Apple doesn't control the market. There's plenty of options. Like Chuck said, if you don't like the way Apple does business, go buy an Android phone.
Sure. All right. Great.
And you've got we're a little bit shaky on Google, although I think there has to be a way to play Google Play Music through the iPhone. I could be wrong, but you've got Amazon, you've got Pandora, you've got Tidal. Tidal.
Tidal.
Who else have I missed? I know there are other services out there.
There are several of them available. Yes, and I think that all the little guys should get a cut should get a break if Apple's competing against them.
Oh, Bryan, you're making me crazy. So does that mean that that Adobe should get a break because Apple has Photos and Adobe has similar software? I mean,
no. They're not competing. It's not all the same kind of thing. It's not at all the same kind of thing. Photos doesn't compete with Photoshop. That's
okay.
That's
I'll give you that, but Pages competes, at least in theory, with Microsoft Word.
Yes.
And so, should Microsoft get a break because they want to be on Apple's platform?
No, because the App Store situation there is completely and totally different. And also, Microsoft is another giant tech behemoth. They also have all of the money.
John, how can we get through to him?
Okay, let me get through to you one other way. So cut back to, I don't know, 1999, 2000, 2001, and somehow Microsoft owned the store, and Apple was trying to sell stuff through the store, and Microsoft comes in and is competing with them. Or, for instance, Microsoft
Apple did that. Apple did exactly that. Apple was getting beat up by Microsoft in the 90s. Microsoft checks out all the boxes of the enterprise, and everybody was going with Microsoft products, Microsoft Office, Microsoft Exchange. Apple was trying to sell a Unix operating system against this giant behemoth, and Apple was failing and having a hard time. They almost went out of business when Windows 95 came out and copied the Mac. And so what did Apple do? They got smart, and they came up with the phone, and they started weaseling their way into the enterprise. So they solved the problem.
None of that is analogous to the situation in the App Store. None of that is analogous. What is analogous is when Microsoft started giving away.
If you figure out what to do to be successful, and you're smart about it, and you're wildly successful.
Still not analogous. It's not analogous. What is analogous is Microsoft giving away Internet Explorer when and cutting off Netscape's revenue sources at the knees, and we all scream bloody murder about how unfair that was. How
Netscape
completely
was free
unfair that was.
Both were free. It was just Microsoft.
No, Netscape charged for Netscape Navigator. Netscape charged for Netscape Navigator, and then Microsoft came in and gave it away for free and started bundling it.
Is that true?
Yes, of course it's true. I said it.
Oh.
No.
There we go.
Bryan says I have spoken.
Netscape Navigator, not just Netscape, not Firefox. No, but Netscape Navigator.
There was no Firefox.
$30?
I think it was $29.99.
Yeah.
And Microsoft started giving away and started bundling it, and they did it specifically to screw Netscape. And we won't talk about all the other things that Microsoft did that was shady and underhanded at the time. The point is, we, probably everyone in this room, collectively screamed bloody murder about that, about how unfair it was.
Yes.
And now, because it's Apple, now it's like, Apple gets to do what it wants. And Apple is like 15,000 million times bigger and more important than Microsoft ever was.
Microsoft got away with that one because it's supposed to be unfair and illegal to take your products into a loss in order to drive a competitor out of business. There's stories of that. There are legion.
Yeah, leveraging monopoly power in one market to gain market share. Another market is expressly and specifically made illegal by the Sherman Antitrust Act. And Microsoft didn't get away with it. They lost it. They got away with it when the Bush administration came in, and their DOJ basically punted on the punishment phase.
So they got away with it.
Microsoft is a convicted monopolist.
So they got away with it.
They did eventually get away with it, but they were convicted for it.
Oh. This spirited discussion with members of the Daily Observations podcast continues in the next edition of MacVoices. Find out the points that are made, the points that are conceded, and whether anybody convinces anyone of anything, and whether we convince you of anything. That's next time on MacVoices. I hope you'll join us. Until then, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.